Another day, another set of myths from Black Lives Matter that people are currently rioting over that we need to take down. And the subject of today's myth, which is given away in the title and thumbnail of this video, and I don't even know why I'm explaining it to you, is the myth of Breonna Taylor. Say her name, because Breonna Taylor was sleeping in her bed when cops showed up to the wrong house, didn't knock, and murdered her. They came in and executed her because she was black, and cops are racist, and that's what cops do to black people because they're racist. Well, I'm here to break it to you that everything that you think you know about the Breonna Taylor case, unless you're somebody who's actually informed, which is like, 1 to 5% of the actual American population, is completely false and is just that, a myth. Now, by the end of this video, you will know for certain that the myth that the police did not announce themselves, that the police did not knock, that the police were at the wrong house, and that the police had no justification for serving a warrant on Breonna Taylor's place are all completely false. And first, we're going to start off with the myth that the police did not announce their presence, which is completely not true, despite the fact that people are trying to muddy the waters around the issue and make it seem like the police did not announce themselves. There is an eyewitness, you can hear his testimony on video, who heard the police announce their presence while knocking on the door of Breonna Taylor.
Police.
Yeah, I heard police.
And he claims that he heard them say it only once.
One time.
Police.
Now, this guy has no reason to lie, and he's also the closest witness in terms of proximity to the officers while they were conducting the raid. He was actually in the adjoining staircase that was right by the officers when they were knocking on the door of Breonna Taylor. Now, people try to muddy the waters on this. They say, oh, well, there's 11 other people who said that they heard them not announce, even though that's not humanly possible, and only heard the gunshots or the banging on the door. Now, this is completely ridiculous because if you just rank the sounds in their loudness, you could understand why people further away might be able to hear gunshots, but might not be able to hear voices. These are basic logical facts. Again, you not hearing something is not evidence of you hearing that something not being said. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So there's nothing to support myth number one about the Breonna Taylor case, that the police did not announce their presence. And it also doesn't follow logically. If you watch footage of no-knock raids where they don't knock before breaking down the door, the police are always shouting, "Police search warrant, police search warrant." Now, whether or not the occupants inside the home actually heard them announce police search warrant is neither here nor there, but it makes no sense strategically, and it is in no way procedurally a part of the no-knock process to not announce your presence as police officers, especially after you broke down the door. The only thing that is actually something that theoretically could be in dispute is whether or not the police officers knocked, because they did in fact have a no-knock warrant. However, the reason that's actually something that theoretically could be disputable is because a no-knock warrant procedurally gives the officers no requirement to knock. However, we know in this case specifically that the police officers did in fact knock on the door, and we know this from two places. One, we know this from the witness that I was describing earlier, who was in the staircase and actually heard them announce themselves. But we also know this from Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker was Breonna Taylor's boyfriend that was in her apartment with her, and according to him, and again, he's recorded on audio saying this, the police knocked 3 times. This is why Walker actually came to the hallway of the apartment with his gun and fired upon the officer when he entered the building, because Walker admittedly heard the knocking 3 different times, but did not hear the announcement.
I'm laying in bed. It's a loud knock at the door. It's a loud bang at the door. Both of us are not decent. Can't even think of the word right now. We're at home. We're in the bed. It's 12 at night. Our day's over. So it's a loud bang at the door. She pops up out of her sleep. It scared her to death. Me too. Like, who is that? So it's a loud boom at the door. First thing she said was, "Who is it?" No response. So we like, what the heck? We both get up, start putting on clothes. Another knock at the door. She's like, "Who is it?" Loud at the top of her lungs. No response. So I'm like, what the heck? So then I grab my gun, which is legal. Like, I'm licensed to carry everything. I've never even fired my gun outside of a range. I'm scared to death. So she says that there's another knock at the door. She's yelling at the top of her lungs, and I am too at this point. Who is it? No answer, no response, no anything. So we like, what the heck? We both just see what I have on. Grab the nearest thing. These aren't even mine. These are hers. Like, so we both are just putting on something to go answer the door and see who's knocking at the door this late at night.
Again, this makes sense because banging on your door is typically louder than a human voice, even when that human voice is yelling. So Walker doesn't dispute that they knocked. Nobody serious about this disputes that they knock. I see a lot of people stumbling and bumbling about this when they're completely wrong and completely ignorant. I was watching a stream from the amazing Lucas, who is not so amazing. Haha, I know, great joke. Buffoonishly stumble and bumble through the facts of the case, proving that he knows absolutely nothing about it, claiming that the 11 witnesses who dispute hearing the voices of the officers announcing themselves as them saying that they weren't knocking. Meanwhile, never mentioning at any point whatsoever the fact that Kenneth Walker clearly says that he was reacting based on the knocking. Now, unfortunately, after the live stream is over, Lucas moved it to members only, so you can't actually watch the stream unless you give him money. And considering his commentary is less than worthless on this issue, I have no interest in paying him. The moment somebody sends me a clip of this buffoon stumbling and bumbling in the exact parts, I will include it in another video so we can all point and laugh at him just like he deserves, because he was 100% wrong on this and he should be horribly embarrassed. Now, the next myth that we're going to go into, we're going to knock out in two parts. First, the idea that there was no justification for the warrant on Breonna Taylor's place, and the even more outlandish myth, the idea that Breonna Taylor's apartment was the wrong place, that she was completely innocent, the cops meant to raid somewhere else, but then they accidentally stumbled into her house, killing her, and thus it's the police officer's fault. Both of these are not true. The reason that Breonna Taylor was a person of interest in this investigation was because she was on again, off again, dating a man called Jamarcus Glover. Not to be confused with the guy that she was in the apartment with, Kenny Walker, who had no criminal record whatsoever. Jamarcus Glover was a drug dealer. He was the centerpiece of the drug investigation that the Louisville PD were conducting at the time that they decided to raid Breonna Taylor's home. But just because she was dating him, you might be saying, that doesn't necessarily mean that she was intimately involved in the drug operation with Jamarcus Glover. And if you think that, you'd be completely and 100% wrong. The reason that Breonna Taylor ended up getting roped into this investigation is due to the fact that she was seen multiple times going to and from her apartment to the other drug sites with Jamarcus Glover that they were surveilling and they raided that same night. On top of that, Breonna Taylor was also receiving at her home packages for Jamarcus Glover. On top of that, there are audio recordings from jail when Jamarcus Glover was arrested in other instances where he is telling people to go get the money for his bail at guess whose apartment. Yes, that's right, Breonna Taylor's apartment. Listen to it for yourself.
So where your money at?
You gonna stay there?
Yeah, I'm gonna stay.
You see where my money is?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go through I'm gonna go through the cure right now. I'm not trying to hide nothing from you or nothing, for like, I'm gonna go through the most about my money. Like, that shit was, shit, what you mean? Like, Bree had like $8 grand. And I still got money.
Bree had $8 grand of your money?
Yeah.
Did she tell you where it was?
And on top of that, on another occasion, Breonna Taylor actually rented a vehicle from Enterprise, lent it to her then boyfriend Jamarcus Glover, and that Enterprise vehicle ended up having a dead body inside of it. So the idea that Breonna Taylor has no connection with this drug operation or with the main drug dealer that the police were investigating is completely false and ridiculous. Remember, a warrant doesn't have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It just has to prove probable cause that a crime was committed. And with all the evidence in the documentation, I see the police had a perfect justification in order to search the home of Breonna Taylor. Now, what I just told you is in no way, shape, or form controversial. As long as you're not lazy like the amazing Lucas, and you actually took the time to read the relevant documentation around the case before perpetuating ridiculous myths about the case, then this is something that is acknowledged across the political spectrum. Even those who make the case that Breonna Taylor broke off her association with Jamarcus Glover acknowledge that that break-off of association was in the days prior to the raid on her house, meaning that the police had already collected that information and went for the warrants, and that change was relatively recently, and there's no real way that the police could have known that she severed her link with him that close to the raid. So now that we know it didn't happen, we know what are myths being perpetuated by people who are either ignorant, lazy, or with malicious intent, let's move on to what actually happened the night that Breonna Taylor was killed by the police, and I will explain to you why the charges for the one officer are the only charges that constitute any sense in this case. So the police pull up to Breonna Taylor's apartment complex. It is the right address, Breonna Taylor's name, address, a picture of her door, and her social security number are all on the warrant. It is clearly the correct location, and at about 12:43 they approach the door. The officers knock and announce their presence. The knocking is confirmed not just by the independent witness that was closest to the officers when they did knock, but by Kenneth Walker, who is inside the house. Two people with no reason whatsoever to lie. They also announce their presence, and that announcing of the presence is confirmed by that independent witness that was closest to the scene. All of the other witnesses who said that they did not hear it were much further away than the independent witness, and considering that Kenneth Walker heard the knocking and didn't hear the announcing, we can assume that the announcing was not as loud as the knocking. After 3 sets of knocking, the police officers decide that they've given the people inside the home long enough to answer the door, and they bring a battering ram and try to break down the door. It takes them a few tries, but they do crack the door open. At that point, Mattingly enters the apartment, and Kenneth Walker, who is standing with Breonna Taylor in the hallway, fires one shot, hitting Mattingly in his femoral artery. Mattingly then draws his gun and returns fire, firing 6 shots in the direction of Kenneth Walker, who just shot him, and Breonna Taylor. Now, after Mattingly is wounded and he's starting to bleed out, a second cop who remained in the doorway also begins firing his gun in the direction of Kenneth Walker and Breonna Taylor. A third officer on the scene actually goes around the back of the apartment and begins firing through a glass door and a bedroom window. And some of the bullets that were fired by the officer behind the apartment actually go into another apartment where 3 people were there, including one person who was a pregnant woman. Now, Taylor was hit by the 2 officers in the doorway who were returning Kenneth Walker's fire, and the fatal shot came from the officer who wasn't wounded in the doorway. Now, because the officers who killed Breonna Taylor were responding to gunfire that wounded one of the officers critically, he needed to go to the hospital and have surgery in order to save his life, they are not charged in the death of Breonna Taylor. However, the officer that went around back was charged for firing those bullets that ended up in an apartment that was in no way connected to the incident, because that was reckless endangerment of people in that other apartment. There's no evidence whatsoever that the officer who went around the back had anything to do with the death of Breonna Taylor, but he did act recklessly, which is why he was charged with something, even if that something was not related to the death of Breonna Taylor. The police were completely justified in returning fire based on the fact that they were serving a warrant and they were fired upon, and one of them was struck by a bullet. Now, Kenneth Walker was initially charged with wounding the officer. However, when it was determined that it was likely that Kenneth Walker did not hear the police officers announce their presence, those charges were dropped because Kenneth Walker, not hearing that, had no way of knowing that they were police officers coming into the apartment serving a warrant. In fact, if you go to Kenneth Walker's testimony, he actually tells the police officers that he thought it was Jamarcus Glover breaking into the house to get revenge on either him or Breonna Taylor. And that's why he grabbed his gun, and that's why he was prepared to defend himself. And this is why Kenneth Walker is not facing any criminal charges, despite the fact that he wounded a police officer and nearly killed him.
I was honestly thinking it was because we've been on and off together, whatever, for like 7 years or whatever. So it was a guy that she was messing with or whatever throughout that time, you know. And he popped up over there once before while I was there like a couple months ago. So that's what I thought was going on.
Now, the facts of this case are crystal clear. There was no crime committed either by Kenneth Walker or by the officers that were executing a legal search warrant. And even worst case scenario, that they executed a no-knock warrant where they didn't knock before entering. At the time that this event happened, no-knock warrants were legal in Kentucky, so no crime would have been committed, and worst case scenario, you would have a wrongful death case, which would be a civil issue and require a payout to the family, which the Taylor family did receive for her death. There's no murder because there's no intent. If police intended on murdering Breonna Taylor or Kenneth Walker, they wouldn't have gone to a judge, got a legal no-knock warrant, decided in their staging area that they were going to knock and announce, and wait for Kenneth Walker to shoot one of them nearly fatally in the femoral artery before they started firing back at them. This is a completely ridiculous assertion that the cops are in any way guilty of any crime whatsoever against Breonna Taylor. It's just not the case. Because Kenneth Walker did not hear the police make their announcement, it was reasonable for him to believe that he was in a break-in scenario and he had every right to defend the home that he was staying in. The police, who were executing a legal search warrant and announced themselves, had every reason to believe that the drug raid that they were going on went bad when an officer was shot by one of the occupants of the residence. Nobody is at fault here. It is a tragedy through and through. Both parties acted reasonably based on the information that they had and in accordance with the laws that are relevant to the case at hand. The only person who is guilty of a crime is the officer that was reckless, and that's for firing into a completely unrelated apartment. Now I'm going to close with some words from the Attorney General from Kentucky because I found his words quite illuminating when it comes to this case, and I think it's important that you hear it from the top cop of Kentucky.
Evidence shows that officers both knocked and announced their presence at the apartment. The officers' statements about their announcement are corroborated by an independent witness who was near in proximity to apartment 4. During the last 6 months, we've all heard mention of possible charges that could be brought in this case. It's important to understand that all the charges that have been mentioned have specific meanings and ramifications. Criminal homicide encompasses the taking of a life by another. While there are 6 possible homicide charges under Kentucky law, these charges are not applicable to the facts before us because our investigation showed, and the grand jury agreed, that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in their return of deadly fire after having been fired upon by Kenneth Walker. Let me state that again. According to Kentucky law, the use of force by Mattingly and Cosgrove was justified to protect themselves. This justification bars us from pursuing criminal charges in Miss Breonna Taylor's death. I know that not everyone will be satisfied with the charges we've reported today. My team set out to investigate the circumstances surrounding Ms. Taylor's death. We did it with a singular goal in mind, pursuing the truth. Kentuckians deserve no less. The city of Louisville deserves no less. Every person has an idea of what they think justice is. My role as special prosecutor in this case is to set aside everything in pursuit of the truth. My job is to present the facts to the grand jury, and the grand jury then applies those facts to the law. If we simply act on emotion or outrage, there is no justice. Mob justice is not justice. Justice sought by violence is not justice. It just becomes revenge.
That's where I'm going to leave it here. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Leave your comments on this case in the comment section of this video. This has been me breaking down the Breonna Taylor incident. Till next time.